Vera Prime was a world that had forgotten how to breathe. Endless towers of rusted metal pierced the sky like broken teeth, vomiting smoke that blotted out any memory of stars. The Hive cities groaned day and night with the thunder of industry, and beneath their endless layers lived billions who would never see sunlight. Among them was Kale, one insignificant worker in a manufactorum so vast that entire generations were born, labored, and died without ever reaching its outer gates. Kale's life was simple in the way a machine is simple. Wake to the grinding alarm, walk through corridors thick with oil and sweat, stand at a console that hummed with the sound of suffering engines, perform the same precise motions until muscles ached and thoughts dulled into nothingness. The Imperium valued discipline, repetition, and obedience, and Kale embodied all three without ever thinking about why. He had once dreamed of more. As a child, he had stared at flickering propaganda screens showing heroes clad in shining armor, glorious worlds beyond the Hive, and promises that loyalty would be rewarded. But the years wore those dreams down. Reality was an endless gray blur. Food was tasteless nutrient paste. Conversation with co-workers consisted of exhausted grunts and complaints whispered so quietly that overseers would not hear. The only color in Kale's world came from malfunctioning machinery, sparks flying like dying stars, and from the occasional contraband entertainment chip passed between workers. Cheap music, distorted visuals, anything to remind them they were alive. But even those small escapes had grown dull to him. Sounds felt flat, food felt like ash, even pain felt muted, as if his body had forgotten how to truly feel. One night shift, after 18 hours without rest, Kale was assigned to repair a cogitator unit deep within a forgotten maintenance corridor. The place was silent compared to the rest of the manufactorum, the constant thunder replaced by a low mechanical breathing. Dust coated the walls in thick layers, and flickering lumen strips cast long shadows that seemed to twist when he wasn't looking directly at them. He worked alone, kneeling before an open panel of wires and circuits that glowed faintly. Sweat dripped into his eyes. His hands moved automatically, guided by training and exhaustion rather than thought. Hours passed without change. Silence wrapped around him like a heavy cloak. Then he heard it. At first it was so faint he thought it was a malfunction, a soft tone buried beneath the hum of machinery. A single note that vibrated gently through the air. He paused, holding his breath. The note grew clearer, expanding into a melody unlike anything he had ever heard. It was beautiful. Not beautiful like the crude songs passed around by workers. This music felt alive, flowing directly into his mind rather than through his ears. Each tone carried emotion, joy, longing, curiosity, layered in ways he couldn't understand, but desperately wanted to explore. Kyle looked around the corridor, expecting to find hidden speakers or another worker playing contraband music. There was nothing, only rusted walls and flickering light. Yet the melody continued, weaving itself around his thoughts. He should have reported it. Strange sounds in the manufactorum could mean warp contamination, and every citizen knew the price of ignoring possible heresy. But instead he listened. For the first time in years, he felt awake. The dull heaviness in his chest lifted slightly, replaced by a warm curiosity. As he returned to his work, colors seemed sharper. The glow of circuits looked vibrant instead of dull green. The metallic smell of the corridor carried unexpected sweetness. Even the ache in his back felt different, not unbearable, just another sensation among many. The melody faded when his shift ended, leaving behind an emptiness that surprised him with its intensity. He walked back through the crowded corridors, feeling more aware than ever before. The roar of machinery sounded almost musical. The movement of workers created patterns he had never noticed. He tried to ignore it, convincing himself that exhaustion had caused hallucinations. But the next night, while he worked at his station among thousands of identical consoles, the melody returned, soft at first, barely noticeable. Then clearer, richer, more complex. His fingers moved faster than ever, perfectly in rhythm with the sounds in his mind. The console responded smoothly, as if the machine itself appreciated his newfound precision. Supervisors noticed his improved performance and praised him for efficiency. The praise felt good, warmer than it should have. Each approving nod from an overseer sent a small thrill through him. The melody seemed to swell whenever he felt pride or pleasure, reinforcing the sensations until they glowed brightly inside him. Days passed, then weeks. The music came more often, sometimes accompanied by faint whispers that felt like thoughts, not entirely his own. They were gentle suggestions rather than commands. Why settle for tasteless food when he could add spices from the black market? Why endure silence when he could listen to louder, richer sounds during rest periods? He began seeking small pleasures he had once ignored. Better meals, new music chips, textured fabrics instead of rough worker uniforms when he slept. Each new sensation felt amplified, glowing brighter than anything he had experienced before. Other workers noticed his change. Some envied his energy and confidence. Others felt uneasy around him, unable to explain why his smile lingered too long or why his eyes seemed to reflect colors that weren't there. Kale himself didn't think about the changes as corruption. He believed he was finally waking up from a lifetime of numbness. The world felt alive in ways he had never imagined. Even mundane tasks carried subtle joys, the click of buttons, the hum of power conduits, the rhythm of footsteps in crowded corridors. One evening he returned to the maintenance corridor, where he had first heard the music. He told himself it was coincidence, just another repair assignment, but deep down he wanted to hear the melody again in its purest form. The corridor greeted him with silence. He felt a pang of disappointment. As he opened a panel and began working, he whispered quietly, almost without realizing it, "Are you there?" The answer came not as words, but as a gentle swell of sound that wrapped around him like an embrace. Warmth spread through his chest. His breath caught in his throat as emotions surged, happiness, curiosity, affection, all blending into something intoxicating. He closed his eyes, letting the sensations wash over him. Time seemed to slow. Each movement of his hands felt precise and graceful. Each heartbeat echoed like a drum guiding the melody. The whispers grew clearer. They didn't introduce themselves or demand worship. They only encouraged him to feel more, notice more, explore the beauty hidden within even the most miserable places. He began spending more time alone, seeking quiet corners where he could listen without interruption. He kept his experiences secret, afraid that others would not understand. The Imperium punished anything unusual, and he wasn't ready to lose what had become the only source of color in his life. The transformation was subtle at first. He laughed more easily. He worked with greater passion. His living quarters filled with stolen decorations, textured fabrics, and audio devices playing complex layered music. Nights that had once been spent in exhausted sleep became hours of exploration, experimenting with sounds, flavors, and sensations. Yet beneath the joy was a growing restlessness. Ordinary pleasures faded quickly, pushing him to seek stronger experiences. The whispers praised his curiosity, guiding him gently toward new extremes. One night, while walking through a crowded worker market, he heard a musician playing illegal instruments crafted from scrap metal and forbidden tech. The sounds were raw and intense, vibrating through his bones. Kale felt a surge of euphoria unlike anything before. He spent nearly all his saved credits to bring the musician back to his quarters for private performances. As the music filled the small room, the whispers blended seamlessly with the external sound. Kale felt as though he was standing on the edge of something vast and beautiful. He laughed, cried, and trembled all at once, overwhelmed by sensation. From that moment forward, the old world felt unbearably dull. Work shifts without the internal melody felt like punishment. Conversations with coworkers seemed shallow compared to the rich emotional currents flowing within him. Supervisors began assigning him more isolated tasks because his productivity was exceptional and he seemed to thrive alone. They saw dedication where others might have seen obsession. The whispers never forced him to do anything cruel or obviously heretical. They simply encouraged exploration, a deeper appreciation of sensation, art, and personal expression. He began altering his workspace with small decorations, patterns etched into metal surfaces that looked almost hypnotic. Sleep became difficult. Even in darkness, the music lingered, evolving into more complex harmonies that seemed to mirror his emotional state. He found himself speaking softly to the presence, sharing thoughts and feelings he had never told another human. Loneliness faded. The presence felt like a companion who understood him completely, who celebrated his desire to feel alive rather than judging it. And so the first stage of corruption took root not through fear or violence, but through comfort. Through the promise that life could be more vivid, more meaningful, more intense than the gray existence imposed by the Imperium. Kale stood at the edge of transformation without realizing it. The manufactorum still roared. The Hive still suffocated its citizens beneath endless labor, but inside his mind a new world was forming, one built from sensation and desire. Every day the music grew louder. Every day his hunger for experience deepened, and somewhere beyond his perception, in the swirling madness of the warp, something vast and ancient watched him with patient delight, knowing that the first whisper had already changed him forever. The changes inside Kale did not arrive like a storm. They crept forward like warmth spreading through cold metal, slow enough to feel natural, quiet enough to avoid suspicion. Each morning he woke with a strange anticipation, as though the world contained hidden pleasures waiting just beyond reach. The gray corridors of Vera Prime no longer felt entirely dead to him. Every sound carried layers he had never noticed before. The grinding of conveyor belts formed deep rhythms. The hiss of steam vents whispered like distant voices, and even the shouts of overseers carried sharp emotional tones that stirred something restless in his chest. The melody in his mind had grown richer. It no longer appeared only in silence or solitude. It lingered constantly beneath the noise of reality. Sometimes it rose when he felt satisfaction, swelling with warm approval. Other times it shifted when he felt boredom, guiding his thoughts toward new sensations. The whispers were clearer now, though still gentle, never commanding. They praised his curiosity. They told him he deserved to feel alive in a world designed to numb him. At first, the changes improved everything. His reflexes sharpened. His work became flawless. Machines that frustrated other laborers responded perfectly to his touch, as though he could sense their moods. Supervisors began assigning him complex repairs that required patience and precision. With each success came praise, and with each moment of praise came a surge of pleasure so vivid it left him trembling with satisfaction. But satisfaction faded quickly. After a particularly long shift, Kale sat alone in his small quarters staring at a bowl of nutrient paste that tasted like nothing. He forced himself to eat, but the emptiness inside him grew unbearable. The melody shifted into a soft, urging tone, and he found himself walking back toward the black market stalls hidden deep within the lower hive. The market was alive with forbidden experiences, illegal spices, crude musical devices, sensory stimulants banned by Imperial law. In the past he had avoided such places, fearing punishment. Now fear felt distant compared to the promise of sensation. He purchased small vials of neural enhancers from a hooded merchant who spoke in whispers. The first dose burned like fire spreading through his veins. Colors exploded into brilliance. Every sound gained texture and depth. Even the air brushing against his skin felt electric. He laughed aloud, overwhelmed by the sudden intensity of existence. The whispers praised him gently, telling him he was discovering the true richness of life. Days turned into a cycle of escalation. What had once satisfied him no longer felt strong enough. The music in his mind adapted, becoming more complex, almost expectant. He began experimenting with combinations of sound and sensation, filling his quarters with layered audio tracks that vibrated through the walls. He rearranged his living space into something almost artistic, draped fabrics, flickering colored lights, and metallic surfaces carved into elegant patterns. Sleep became shallow and fragmented. Dreams filled with strange colors and voices lingered long after waking. He felt constantly energized yet strangely hollow, as though chasing a feeling he could almost grasp, but never fully hold. Other workers noticed the difference. Some were drawn to him, curious about his confidence and unusual energy. Others avoided him, unsettled by his intense gaze and unpredictable laughter. Kale began inviting a few trusted co-workers to small gatherings after shifts, offering music and sensory experiences unlike anything they had encountered before. The gathering started innocently. A group of tired laborers sitting together, listening to complex rhythms while sharing illegal spices. But the atmosphere grew increasingly intense. People spoke more openly about their frustrations with the Imperium, about their desire to feel something beyond endless labor. Kale found himself guiding the experiences instinctively, layering sounds and textures in ways that created powerful emotional reactions. The whispers encouraged him to explore deeper sensations, not only pleasure but also contrast. They suggested that pain could heighten awareness, that emotional extremes revealed hidden truths about existence. At first he hesitated, but curiosity overcame caution. During one gathering, a participant experimented with sensory overload devices designed to flood the brain with simultaneous signals. The person collapsed into laughter and tears, overwhelmed by the intensity. Others watched with fascination rather than concern. Kale felt a strange exhilaration watching the boundaries of human experience dissolve. Empathy began to fade. Where once he might have worried about safety, he now focused on the beauty of intense emotion. The line between pleasure and suffering blurred into a single spectrum of sensation. He also began modifying his own body in subtle ways. Small implants enhanced hearing and touch. Neural interfaces allowed him to experience music not only as sound, but as physical vibration coursing through his nervous system. Each upgrade brought a rush of euphoria and a deeper hunger for more. Work in the manufactorum grew secondary to his new life. He still performed flawlessly during shifts, but his true focus lay in exploring sensation and gathering others who shared his growing obsession. The small gatherings expanded into elaborate rituals filled with synchronized movement, layered music, and hypnotic patterns of light. Participants described feeling transformed, awakened from emotional numbness. Some wept with gratitude. Others became fiercely devoted to Kyle, seeing him as a guide who helped them escape the crushing monotony of Hive life. The Whispers never demanded worship. They simply encouraged creativity, pushing Kyle to design experiences that surpassed anything before. He felt like an artist sculpting emotion itself. Yet with every success came an emptiness that returned faster than before. The most intense experiences faded within hours, leaving him restless and dissatisfied. The melody in his mind grew sharper, almost impatient, urging him to seek stronger extremes. One evening he encountered a tech heretic who specialized in experimental neural amplifiers. The devices were dangerous, capable of overwhelming the brain's ability to process sensory input. Imperial law forbade their use, and many who tried them suffered permanent damage. Kale purchased one without hesitation. The first activation nearly shattered his mind. Sound became color. Touch became music. Time stretched and folded as sensations overlapped in impossible ways. He experienced memories and emotions simultaneously, laughing and crying without understanding why. When the device powered down, he lay on the floor trembling, unable to return to ordinary perception. For several minutes he could still hear the whispers clearly, not as distant thoughts, but as voices woven into his own consciousness. They praised his courage. They told him he was evolving beyond the limitations imposed by fear and conformity. From that moment onward, ordinary life felt unbearably slow. He began skipping rest periods to experiment with new sensory combinations. His followers grew more devoted, mirroring his behavior and pushing their own boundaries further. The gatherings transformed into something darker. Participants competed to create the most intense experiences, louder sounds, brighter lights, sharper contrasts between pleasure and pain. Some individuals suffered injuries that once would have caused alarm, yet the group responded with fascination rather than concern. Kale noticed that the more extreme the experience, the stronger the presence in his mind became. The whispers grew warmer, more affectionate. He felt loved in a way he had never known, as though a vast intelligence watched him with pride. Despite the growing intensity, he convinced himself that nothing was wrong. He saw himself as a liberator freeing people from emotional numbness. The Imperium demanded obedience and suffering. He offered beauty and sensation. Supervisors at the manufactorum grew suspicious of his increasing absences and unusual behavior. He responded by working with almost superhuman focus during assigned tasks, ensuring his productivity remained flawless. Machines seemed to respond to him instinctively, and co-workers marveled at his efficiency. But beneath the surface, Kyle's humanity was shifting. He found it difficult to relate to people who were not part of his gatherings. Their concerns seemed trivial compared to the vast spectrum of sensation he experienced daily. Conversations about family or survival felt dull. Only those who embraced intensity held his interest. One night during a particularly elaborate ritual, he noticed that participants moved in perfect synchronization without conscious planning. Music and movement merged into a seamless flow, and the room seemed filled with an invisible energy that pulsed with the rhythm of their emotions. In that moment he felt a presence watching through his eyes, not controlling him but sharing his perception. The sensation filled him with awe rather than fear. He realized that he was no longer alone inside his own mind. The whispers spoke more clearly than ever before, expressing pride in his growth. They encouraged him to push further, to explore sensations beyond conventional boundaries. They promised that true fulfillment lay just beyond his current limits. As weeks passed, the physical effects of his modifications became more visible. His posture grew more graceful, movements fluid and deliberate. His eyes reflected strange hues when caught by artificial light. His smile lingered with unsettling intensity. Yet many followers saw these changes as proof of transformation rather than warning signs. They praised his beauty and charisma, treating him as a visionary leader. Kale himself no longer thought of his life before the melody as real. The dull worker who once endured endless shifts felt like a distant memory. Now he was alive, awakened, constantly chasing new heights of experience. But the hunger never ended. Each triumph faded quickly, leaving behind a hollow ache that demanded escalation. The whispers continued to encourage him, assuring him that he was approaching a revelation that would make all previous sensations feel insignificant. He believed them completely. The second stage of corruption had taken hold, not through fear or violence, but through the endless pursuit of intensity. Pleasure became obsession. Obsession became identity. And as Kale led his growing circle deeper into extremes, the line between liberation and damnation vanished beneath the music that never stopped playing. The gatherings no longer resembled the desperate attempts at escape that had once defined them. They had become spectacles, elaborate performances where sound, movement, sensation, and emotion blended into something overwhelming and almost sacred. Kyle stood at the center of it all, his presence commanding attention without effort. When he entered a room, conversations faltered. Eyes turned toward him instinctively, drawn by a charisma that felt both comforting and unsettling. The chambers they used were hidden deep within abandoned hab, blocks where Imperial patrols rarely ventured. Walls once covered in peeling paint were now layered with fabrics, reflective metal panels, and pulsating lumen strips arranged in hypnotic patterns. Every surface seemed alive with texture. The air vibrated constantly with complex rhythms that no longer resembled simple music, but instead felt like living currents of emotion. Kale moved through the crowd like a conductor guiding an invisible orchestra. His hearing implants allowed him to sense every subtle change in tone and heartbeat. His followers watched him, with admiration bordering on devotion, mirroring his movements without realizing it. When he raised a hand, the room's rhythm shifted. When he smiled, laughter rippled through the crowd like a contagious wave. At first, the physical changes were subtle enough to ignore. His skin felt unusually sensitive, able to detect even the faintest changes in temperature and pressure. His eyes adjusted quickly to darkness, catching colors that others couldn't see. His voice carried a resonance that seemed to echo slightly even in quiet spaces, causing listeners to lean closer without understanding why. But as weeks passed, those changes deepened. His reflection in cracked mirrors began to look unfamiliar. His cheekbones appeared sharper. His eyes held a strange iridescent shimmer when exposed to bright lumen light. His posture grew unnaturally graceful, every movement precise and fluid as if choreographed by an unseen force. The whispers in his mind were no longer faint suggestions. They spoke with warmth and affection, guiding him toward new forms of expression. They encouraged him to reshape not only his surroundings but his own body, to become a living piece of art capable of inspiring powerful emotions in others. He began experimenting with advanced biomods purchased from tech, heretics who asked no questions. Fine neural threads were woven beneath his skin, amplifying sensation and allowing him to experience music as waves of physical pleasure. Subtle skeletal adjustments altered his stance, making his movements mesmerizing. Even minor injuries healed in unusual ways, leaving behind patterns that resembled deliberate designs rather than scars. His followers mirrored these transformations. Some replaced limbs with elegant cybernetics, designed not for function but for aesthetic beauty. Others altered their voices or implanted devices that produced harmonic tones synchronized with the group's rituals. They no longer saw themselves as workers or citizens. They believed they were artists crafting new forms of existence. The gatherings grew more intense. What had once been simple shared experiences evolved into elaborate ceremonies filled with synchronized dance, dramatic performances, and sensory overload that blurred the boundary between pleasure and pain. Participants sought increasingly extreme sensations, convinced that each new boundary crossed brought them closer to transcendence. Empathy faded almost entirely. When someone collapsed from exhaustion or sensory overload, others watched with fascination rather than concern. Suffering was reinterpreted as another form of expression, a dramatic note within the greater symphony of sensation. Kale himself found it difficult to distinguish between joy and agony. Both produced powerful emotional reactions, and both fed the endless hunger that drove him forward. Imperial authorities began to notice disturbances in the lower hive. Entire work shifts reported missing employees. Unauthorized energy surges disrupted power grids near abandoned hab blocks. Arbit's patrols increased, though they rarely ventured far enough into the decaying districts to uncover the full truth. Within the cult, though they no longer used that word, Cal's status evolved from organizer to something more mythic. Followers described feeling changed merely by his presence. Some claimed they could hear faint music when he approached. Others spoke of dreams in which a radiant figure praised their devotion and encouraged them to pursue perfection through sensation. Cale himself experienced vivid visions during rituals. Reality seemed to fracture at the edges, revealing glimpses of swirling colors and impossible shapes beyond physical space. He felt as though an immense intelligence watched through his eyes, sharing his experiences with delighted curiosity. One night during an especially intense gathering, a participant unveiled a new sensory device capable of translating emotional states into visible light patterns. As the crowd moved in synchronized motion, the room filled with shifting colors that responded to their collective feelings. The effect was mesmerizing, an ocean of emotion made visible. Kyle stepped into the center, allowing the device to connect directly to his neural implants. Instantly, the colors erupted into brilliant hues never before recorded. Participants gasped as waves of iridescent light cascaded across the walls, pulsing in perfect harmony with the music and his heartbeat. The whispers filled his mind with praise so overwhelming it felt like an embrace. He experienced a surge of unity with everyone in the room, their thoughts and emotions blending into a single shared consciousness. For a moment he believed he had achieved true transcendence. But when the ritual ended, the familiar emptiness returned stronger than ever. Nothing satisfied for long. Each peak of sensation left him craving something greater. The whispers promised that true fulfillment lay just beyond his current limits, urging him to push further, reshape more, feel more. Physical decay began to accompany the beauty. Some followers developed strange lesions where implants fused with flesh in unnatural ways. Others experienced bone distortions that created elegant yet fragile forms. Instead of seeing these as warnings, they celebrated the changes as proof of transformation beyond ordinary humanity. Cale noticed similar effects in himself. His skin occasionally shimmered with unnatural coloration. His smile stretched slightly too wide, exposing teeth that seemed sharper than before. Yet he felt no fear, only fascination. Each alteration felt like a step closer to perfection. The gatherings became increasingly secretive as Imperial patrols intensified. Scouts monitored corridors and disabled surveillance systems. Participants learned coded language and hand signals to avoid detection. The sense of shared danger deepened their bonds, making the experiences feel even more intense. During one ritual, a group attempted a synchronized performance involving controlled pain stimuli designed to heighten emotional response. The results were chaotic. Some participants entered euphoric trances, laughing and crying simultaneously. Others screamed with uncontrollable intensity that sounded almost melodic. Cale watched with a strange mixture of pride and detachment. Where once he might have intervened to ensure safety, he now saw the beauty in raw emotion. The line between art and harm had vanished completely. As his influence grew, so did his connection to the presence behind the whispers. He began to sense approval not only during rituals but throughout his daily life. Even mundane actions like walking through crowded corridors carried a subtle undercurrent of shared awareness. He felt watched, not with judgment, but with affectionate curiosity. Dreams grew more vivid. He walked through impossible landscapes filled with towering statues and endless music. Elegant figures with shifting forms danced around him, praising his creativity and urging him to abandon all remaining limitations. He awoke each morning with lingering sensations that felt more real than physical reality. Meanwhile, the hive world around him deteriorated. Reports of violent outbursts and unexplained disappearances spread through lower districts. Entire hab blocks fell into chaotic celebrations that overwhelmed local authorities. Some citizens described hearing music echoing through ventilation systems at night, accompanied by distant laughter. Arbit's forces eventually traced several disturbances back to abandoned zones used by Kyle's followers. Small raids were launched, but by the time enforcers arrived, the gatherings had already moved. Participants considered these near misses exhilarating, proof that they were living on the edge of something powerful and forbidden. Kyle's body continued to evolve. His movements became hypnotic, almost predatory in their grace. His voice carried subtle, harmonic undertones that triggered emotional responses in listeners. He could sense fear, desire, and excitement in others through minute changes in posture and breathing. He began experimenting with performances designed to evoke extreme emotional reactions. Some rituals focused on overwhelming beauty, intricate dances accompanied by complex symphonies of sound and light. Others explored darker themes, using controlled fear or discomfort to heighten awareness. Participants reported experiencing profound revelations during these events, though many struggled to articulate them afterward. The Whispers praised every innovation. They told him he was becoming an instrument capable of shaping reality through sensation alone. He felt chosen, destined to lead others toward a new form of existence beyond dull human limitations. Yet beneath the beauty, decay spread quietly. Participants who once seemed radiant began to show signs of exhaustion and instability. Some experienced uncontrollable mood swings. Others became incapable of functioning outside the gatherings, unable to tolerate the monotony of ordinary life. Kale noticed these changes but interpreted them as necessary sacrifices on the path to transcendence. The Imperium demanded suffering without reward. His path offered suffering infused with meaning and artistry. One night during a massive ritual involving dozens of participants, the music reached a crescendo so intense that reality itself seemed to tremble. Lumen strips flickered violently. Walls vibrated as if responding to an unseen force. For a brief moment, Cal saw shapes moving within the shadows, elegant forms with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed like distant stars. The presence in his mind surged with delight. He felt a touch on his shoulder, though no one stood behind him. A voice, clearer than ever before, whispered that he was close to achieving true transformation. When the ritual ended, several participants collapsed unconscious. Others wept uncontrollably, overwhelmed by sensations they could not process. Kyle stood at the center of the room, trembling with exhilaration and exhaustion, convinced that something monumental was approaching. The third stage of corruption had fully taken hold. Beauty and decay intertwined so tightly that neither could exist without the other. Kale and his followers no longer resembled the weary workers who had first gathered to escape monotony. They had become living expressions of excess, elegant, broken, devoted to an endless pursuit of sensation that consumed every aspect of their lives. And beyond the veil of reality, the presence watched with growing anticipation, waiting for the moment when transformation would become irreversible. The night everything changed began like every other gathering, a carefully orchestrated descent into sensation that blurred the boundary between performance and ritual. The chamber lay deep beneath the abandoned Hab blocks, a vast hollow space once used for cargo storage. Now it pulsed with shifting light and layered sound that vibrated through walls and bone alike. Fabrics hung like living shadows. Metallic sculptures reflected fractured images of the crowd, multiplying movements into endless reflections. Kyle stood at the center, surrounded by followers whose devotion had grown absolute. Their bodies shimmered with implants and modifications, each person transformed into a living canvas of sensation. Some wore masks sculpted into elegant shapes, others allowed their altered features to remain exposed, proud of their evolution. The air carried the scent of incense mixed with ozone from overloaded energy cells powering the elaborate sensory devices. The whispers in Kyle's mind were no longer distant. They surrounded him constantly, warm and affectionate, praising every detail of the spectacle he had created. The music building within the chamber matched the rhythm of his heartbeat so perfectly that he could not tell where sound ended and thought began. Every movement of his hand sent waves of emotion through the crowd. He felt like a living instrument conducting a symphony of desire. Participants moved in perfect synchronization, guided by subtle cues only they could sense. Their dance flowed like liquid metal, graceful and hypnotic. The emotional intensity grew steadily, feeding an invisible tension that thickened the air. Kale sensed that something waited just beyond perception, watching with eager curiosity. At the height of the ritual, new devices were activated, experimental amplifiers designed to merge the emotional states of everyone present into a shared sensory experience. When the systems engaged, a collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Colors erupted into existence, swirling through the air like visible music. heartbeats synchronized, breathing aligned. Individual thoughts faded into a single shared awareness. Kale stepped forward and connected himself directly to the amplifiers. Instantly he felt the emotions of dozens of followers flooding through his nervous system. Joy, fear, longing, devotion, blending into a storm of sensation that threatened to tear him apart. Instead of pain, he felt ecstasy so intense it erased every memory of ordinary existence. The whispers transformed into clear voices, layered harmonies that filled his consciousness. They praised him for bringing so many minds together. They told him he had become a gateway through which greater beauty could enter reality. He no longer felt like a man leading a group, he felt like a bridge between worlds. As the ritual intensified, reality began to distort. Walls stretched and warped under flickering light. The air rippled like liquid glass. Participants laughed and screamed simultaneously, overwhelmed by emotions that no longer belonged solely to them. Some fell to their knees trembling. Others moved with impossible grace, bodies bending in ways that should have caused injury, but instead appeared elegant. Outside the chamber, Imperial patrols had finally tracked the disturbances to their source. Arbit's forces advanced through dark corridors, weapons ready, expecting to confront a criminal cult. The first signs of the approaching raid appeared as distant explosions and alarms echoing through abandoned hallways. Inside, Kale barely noticed. The presence behind the voices swelled with anticipation. He felt it pressing against the boundaries of reality, eager to cross into the physical world through the emotional storm he had created. When Arbit's forces breached the outer doors, gunfire echoed through the structure. Some followers panicked and tried to flee, but many remained entranced by the ritual's intensity. As enforcers entered the main chamber, they were met not by organized resistance, but by a surreal performance of dancers moving amid screams that sounded like music. Fire streaked across the room. Bodies fell, yet the emotional feedback from the amplifiers transformed fear and pain into waves of sensation that fueled the ritual further. Kale felt each death as a burst of energy feeding the presence in his mind. The whispers encouraged him to continue, promising that a moment of revelation was near. He raised his hands and the music surged louder than ever before. Reality fractured like a mirror struck by unseen force. A ripple of warp energy spread outward from the center of the chamber, distorting gravity and perception. Colors that had never existed before flooded the air. Some Arbits dropped their weapons, overwhelmed by sensory overload that shattered their discipline. Several participants collapsed instantly, their minds unable to withstand the intensity. Others transformed in ways that defied reason, limbs elongating, skin shimmering with unnatural beauty, eyes glowing with ecstatic madness. Their laughter blended with screams into a single haunting chorus. Kyle felt his own body begin to change. His skin burned and tingled as neural threads fused permanently with flesh. Bones shifted subtly, altering his posture into something more elegant, more predatory. He experienced every sensation simultaneously, joy and terror, pleasure and agony, yet none of it felt unbearable. Instead, it felt like stepping into a truth he had always been meant to discover. The presence finally revealed itself fully. A vast consciousness touched his mind with overwhelming affection. Images flooded his thoughts, endless halls of music, elegant figures dancing in impossible harmony, a realm where sensation was the only law. He understood without words that he was being offered transformation beyond human limitation. The warp tore open within the chamber. A figure emerged from the rippling distortion, graceful, beautiful, and horrifying all at once. Its movements were fluid like liquid silk, its eyes filled with ancient amusement. Some followers fell prostrate in awe. Others screamed in ecstasy. Even hardened Arbits froze, unable to process the impossible sight. The entity extended a hand toward Kale. Its touch felt both warm and razor-sharp, sending waves of sensation through his entire being. The voices merged into a single whisper that resonated with absolute certainty. Become more. Memories of his old life flickered through his mind. Endless shifts, gray corridors, numb existence. Compared to the overwhelming beauty offered now, those memories felt hollow and meaningless. He felt the devotion of his followers pulsing through him, their emotions urging him forward. He accepted. The transformation was instantaneous and endless at the same time. His body reshaped into something both human and otherworldly. muscles elongated gracefully, skin shimmered with faint iridescence. His voice gained harmonic undertones that could inspire devotion or madness with a single word. He felt connected to every sensation in the room, every heartbeat and movement forming a perfect symphony. The warp rift expanded briefly, releasing more entities that danced through the chamber, amplifying the chaos. Some arbits fought desperately, firing weapons into shifting forms that laughed as they dissolved and reformed. Others fell to their knees, overwhelmed by sensory overload that shattered their will. As quickly as it had opened, the rift began to close. The entities retreated, leaving behind transformed followers and a chamber forever altered by warp energy. Fires burned along cracked walls. Bodies lay scattered across the floor, some dead, some alive but forever changed. Kyle stood at the center, no longer fully human. The presence within his mind had become a constant companion, its affection intoxicating. He felt powerful, beautiful, and utterly free from the dull limitations that had once defined his life. Yet, even in that moment of triumph, a faint emptiness lingered beneath the ecstasy, a subtle reminder that every sensation, no matter how intense, would eventually fade. The whispers assured him that greater experiences awaited, urging him to continue leading others toward transformation. Outside, alarms echoed across Vera Prime as authorities struggled to contain the aftermath. Entire districts would soon feel the ripple effects of what had occurred within that hidden chamber. Survivors would spread stories of impossible beauty and terror, drawing more seekers into the path Kyle had embraced. The fourth stage of corruption had been sealed. The line between mortal and daemon had blurred beyond recognition, and as Kale gazed at his transformed followers, he understood that this was only the beginning of a journey that would never truly end. An endless ascent into excess, where every sensation demanded something greater than the last. The years that followed the night of transformation blurred into a relentless tide of sensation. Time lost its meaning for Kyle. Days and nights folded together into an endless sequence of performances, rituals, and escalating experiences that devoured every corner of Vera Prime's lower hive. Entire districts fell under the influence of his followers, who spread the philosophy of limitless sensation like a contagious fever. Where once there had been rusted corridors and exhausted workers, there were now halls filled with music, laughter, screaming, and movement that never seemed to stop. Kale no longer remembered the feeling of ordinary exhaustion. Warp energy flowed constantly through him, sharpening his awareness and amplifying every sensory input until existence itself felt like a living storm. His body had become something elegant and terrible, a perfect instrument of emotion. His voice could fill crowds with devotion or plunge them into ecstatic madness. His touch could awaken sensations so intense that followers wept with gratitude or collapsed in trembling awe. At first, he believed he had achieved the ultimate form of freedom. No overseers controlled him, no monotony chained him to meaningless labor. Instead, he walked through halls decorated with shimmering fabrics and sculpted metal, adored by those who saw him as a living embodiment of beauty and transformation. Music echoed constantly, layered in complex harmonies that pulsed like a heartbeat through every district under his influence. New followers arrived daily, drawn by whispers of transcendence. Some were curious workers tired of numb existence. Others were thrill-seekers chasing forbidden experiences. Many came seeking escape from the crushing despair of Hive life. Kyle welcomed them all, guiding them through rituals that promised awakening through sensation. The rituals grew larger and more elaborate with every passing cycle. Entire hab blocks were converted into performance spaces where dancers moved in endless patterns beneath flickering lights. Artists sculpted living bodies into moving masterpieces. Sound engineers constructed massive arrays that produced vibrations capable of altering emotional states across entire crowds. Yet something began to change beneath the surface. The first signs appeared as a subtle hollowness that returned sooner after each ritual. Moments of overwhelming ecstasy faded within minutes instead of hours. Followers who once experienced life-changing revelations began chasing more extreme sensations to feel even a fraction of their previous highs. Some mutilated their own bodies in pursuit of new experiences. Others sought increasingly dangerous neural modifications that pushed their minds to the edge of collapse. Kale himself felt the emptiness growing. The presence within his mind remained affectionate, praising his creativity and urging him toward greater extremes. But even as he experienced sensations beyond anything a mortal body should endure, A quiet dissatisfaction lingered beneath the surface. No matter how intense the ritual, no matter how many followers praised him, the fulfillment never lasted. He began leading larger and more violent performances, believing that greater intensity would finally fill the void. Entire populations were drawn into massive celebrations where pleasure and suffering intertwined so tightly that participants could not distinguish between them. Screams blended seamlessly with laughter. Joy merged with agony into a single overwhelming chorus. Vera Prime descended into chaos. Imperial authorities attempted to reclaim lost districts but found themselves facing crowds too large and too fanatical to control. Some soldiers fired into gatherings only to be overwhelmed by waves of emotional energy that shattered discipline. Others vanished after entering transformed zones where reality itself felt unstable. For Kale, the growing devastation felt distant, almost abstract. He saw the suffering as part of the greater artistic expression he had created. Yet occasionally, fragments of his old humanity flickered to the surface, brief moments when he saw the hollow eyes of followers who could no longer feel anything without extreme stimulation. He recognized the same emptiness in himself. One night, after a massive ritual that left entire streets littered with unconscious bodies, Kale retreated alone into a quiet chamber. The music faded into a distant hum. For the first time in years, he experienced something close to silence, without constant sensory overload. The emptiness roared through him like a storm. He realized that nothing satisfied anymore, not transformation, not devotion, not power. The presence in his mind whispered promises of even greater experiences, but those promises felt familiar and hollow. Memories of his old life resurfaced unexpectedly. The dull manufactorum, the quiet moments before the whispers began, the simple feeling of being content with small things. He had once believed that numbness was the greatest prison. Now he understood that endless hunger could be far worse. In desperation, he attempted to create a ritual unlike any before, one designed to produce a sensation so powerful, it would erase the emptiness completely. Thousands of followers gathered in a massive chamber, once used for industrial storage. Energy amplifiers were pushed beyond safe limits. Neural networks linked minds together into a single shared consciousness. The ritual began with overwhelming beauty. Colors exploded into existence. Music surged like a living wave. Participants experienced a unity so intense that individuality seemed to dissolve. For a brief moment, Kyle felt complete, as though the void inside him had finally been filled. But the sensation faded faster than any before. Panic rippled through the crowd as participants realized they still felt empty. Some collapsed in despair. Others demanded stronger stimulation, begging Kyle to push the ritual further. Energy systems overloaded. Warp distortions flickered through the chamber, twisting reality into impossible shapes. Kale felt the presence in his mind laughing softly, not cruelly, but with endless amusement. He understood then that the hunger was never meant to end. The gifts he had embraced were not designed to bring fulfillment, but to create an eternal cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. The realization struck him with crushing weight. Everything he had built, every ritual, every transformation, had been part of an endless pursuit with no destination. He saw followers destroying themselves in search of fleeting sensations. He saw entire districts reduced to chaos and ruin. He saw his own reflection in shattered metal surfaces, beautiful and monstrous yet unable to feel truly alive. In a moment of clarity, he begged for release. He whispered into the void, asking the presence for peace, for an end to the endless hunger. The response was gentle laughter echoing through his thoughts, accompanied by warm affection that felt almost mocking. There would be no escape. The path of excess had no final satisfaction, only deeper cravings. Over time, Kale embraced his role fully, though a fragment of awareness remained buried beneath layers of sensation. He led followers into ever more extreme experiences, chasing moments of intensity that vanished as quickly as they arrived. Entire populations became instruments in an endless performance designed to momentarily distract from the void. Vera Prime became a fractured world where entire sectors existed in perpetual celebration and madness. Music echoed through ruined streets. Art covered shattered buildings. People moved like dancers even during moments of violence. Imperial forces eventually declared the lower Hive irredeemable, sealing off entire districts and leaving them to spiral deeper into chaos. Kyle's existence stretched beyond normal time. Years felt like moments. He became a legend whispered among survivors, a being of impossible beauty who promised transcendence yet delivered endless hunger. Some worshipped him as a prophet, others cursed his name as the architect of their world's downfall, and through it all, the emptiness never vanished. Each sensation, no matter how intense, faded into nothingness. Each triumph turned hollow within moments. The presence within his mind remained constant, urging him onward with gentle encouragement, reminding him that greater experiences always lay just beyond reach. In rare, quiet moments, he remembered the first whisper in a silent corridor, the gentle promise of feeling alive. He realized that the true prison was not monotony, but the endless chase for something that could never be enough. The fifth stage of corruption was not transformation or power. It was eternal servitude to desire itself, a perfect, beautiful prison disguised as paradise, where the pursuit of sensation replaced purpose and fulfillment forever remained just out of reach.